Okay, good afternoon everybody and welcome back to the Exchange, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm just checking. We've got a few more people in the waiting room, but I think we're good to go. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Lindsay Anderson and our next session is about a collaborative project which is based along the estuary here in East Devon. Tidelines is a community project which takes a participatory, creative approach to bring communities together along the estuary, providing a space for collaboration and shared learning. Tidelines, which has been building relationships with universities, local organisations, schools and environmental groups in the region since 2018, comprises Anne-Marie, Culhane and Joe Salter, both creative professionals with a multitude of talents between them, including expertise in project management, graphic design, illustration, education, ecology, and eco-social arts practice. I had the great pleasure of working with Anne-Marie and Joe during 2020 in a year-long pilot project, which was undertaken as part of the Socially Engaged Universities project. I have to say, despite the restrictions of COVID, Anne-Marie and Joe did an absolutely fantastic job of reaching a large and diverse sector of local people and engaging them in a conversation around the estuary. Anne-Marie and Joe will be presenting today with one of their collaborative partners, Dr. Tom Powell, a geographer from the University of Exeter, who is a specialist in sustainability, ecology and earth system science. Tom also has a keen interest in engaging with external partners and colleagues to build collaborations which focus on putting research into practice. Thank you, Anne-Marie and Joe.
Hi everyone, my name's Anne-Marie Culhane. I'm really pleased to be here today. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for inviting us to be here with you for the next hour. So I'm one of the coordinators of Tidelines. I'm an eco-social artist. I'm an educator, I'm a project manager, and I've founded and directed a number of long-term projects, creative community projects and non-profit organisations. I'm working as a visiting fellow at the Global Systems Institute at the University of Exeter, and I'm a founding member of Culture Declares Emergency.
Hello, I'm Joe Salter. I'm also a coordinator of Tidelines. I'm an artist, a graphic designer and project manager, and I've been involved with two successful community arts and culture institutions in Scotland, where I have developed an understanding of the integration of community culture with the arts and sciences around location, a sense of belonging. Tom?
Thanks, Anne-Marie and Joe. I'm Tom Powell. I'm a Research Impact Fellow for the Global Systems Institute here at Exeter University. As Lindsay said, I'm an ecologist and a system scientist interested mostly in sort of rebuilding, flourishing relationships between people and the ecology that we depend upon and are embedded in, whether that's in the Sahel with pastoralists and farmers, or in the estuary or with British farmers. The processes are kind of generally led by working very closely with the people who need the research outputs and who help develop the research questions to make sure the research is focused where it can deliver most impact. So it's been a real pleasure to work with Anne-Marie and Joe on Tidelines for the last year and a half or so. And it's a project that's very rooted in place, in this case in the estuary, and also in participation. So in that spirit, we wanted to begin with a moment of reflection and ask you to share in the chat a place that you feel part of or connected to. For me, that's a small muddy creek in a village in Cambridgeshire where I know exactly where the pike lives under a willow tree, or where a grass snake swam across it, or where I keep my boat.
Okay, I'm just going to deliver a quick general description of Tidelines as we see it, to clarify a little bit. Tidelines is a hub of interdisciplinary research and creative community engagement and action. Our vision is to generate innovative interpretation of learning about and response to the changing marine and estuary environment in Exmouth and the ex-estuary at a time of climate and ecological emergency. We invite participation from across the community, around the estuary and across age groups. We're working with the University of Exeter to further their objectives as a civic university in order to try to develop citizen-led research. As Lindsay said earlier, our pilot year in 2020 was funded by socially engaged universities, funding from Erasmus, and along with the Global Systems Institute at the University of Exeter and Wild East Devon. An element of our pilot year has been to invite responses from the estuary community through a number of creative activities. Before we expand a little bit on the structure of collaboration between the community, the university, Tidelines and the estuary, we wanted to invite you to look and listen to the ex-estuary itself, speaking through other people's words and images, and the sound of the estuary herself, recorded by Culhane with a hydrophone, which is an underwater microphone. So I'll just share screen with you and we will start on that.
I'm just looking through people's places. It's really lovely to see and read where you all are. Well, we've gone as far as New Zealand,
Yeah.
Sarah, River Dart,
A particular tree.
yeah, and Yorkshire, Dunsland Park. Not sure where that is. Anyway, thank you very much. And you might even be able to hear elements of the estuary in the background because there's some really noisy seagulls that live on our roof. So sometimes you'll hear a heavy clunking sound, which is hopefully a seagull and nothing else on our roof.
Okay, moving now to share screen. Can everybody see that okay?
Great. At the bottom of our garden is a river. Just to the right of our back gate is a whirlpool. It's very fast. The children make a ritual for Good Friday. I would make hot cross buns and they would sit in a canoe or dinghy and go round and round in a whirlpool. I think there was a song that went with it.
Another passing vessel of great beauty was the shit ship. Beyond the river, along the canal, it would make its stately way down to turf and out to sea. It was lit up like a Christmas tree, and in spite of its function, had a magical, methodical, processional presence, and is much missed, drawing that poetic line in space.
My brother-in-law found a Roman coin in the mud at the bottom of the slipway. It went to the British Museum to be identified, and the coin was dated 330 AD. And the British Museum said it was a votive offering. Someone had thrown it into the river for luck. Were they setting out on a voyage?
The very best sunsets in the world.
The wind is blowing. Cockle shells, mussel shells, ripples, sand, footprints, dog prints, bird prints, vast openness. Right over to the other side of the estuary and beyond, a huge area, enormous. The wind is blowing. Terraced housing nestling along the edge by the harbour. The boats with their double keel upright in the sand. The yellow boys, fluorescent pinky boys, bright red boys, blue-bottomed boats. The wind is blowing and the hills extending out towards Powderham. There's so much space around us. You can get right up close to the buoys. The clouds lay heavy over top. They're big, a big, heavy blanket. The wind is blowing.
1 degree C. Set off at 7:25 for a swim in the estuary. Worked my feet into the cold, wet swimming shoes as I ran up the strand to the harbour. Bright full moon with an orange winter halo and frost on the ground. Arrived to find 5 others. With lockdown rules, we stood apart. A couple were only visible from their head torches. Entered the black, glassy water.
Bikes, crabs, boats, shells, glass, pottery, kayak, turnstone, redshanks, curlew, egret, Canada geese, sup.
Huge shoals of mullet used to explore the cliffs at high tide. One local man used to fire into the shoal with a shotgun and then paddle a boat out to pick them up out of the water, an unusual technique.
Really high tides and stormy, deep sea foam at Orcombe Point, which the dogs are chasing.
The concrete defences are all in place around the duck pond.
Strange sunset, black clouds, black sea, new rockfalls at Orcombe Point, and the sea caves have collapsed.
More storms, saw rock pools full of dead starfish and dead brittlefish, sand gone from lifeboat ramp, seagulls feeding on sea slugs.
Just as the estuary is getting perfect for summery swims, enormous jellyfish arrive and shock me.
In lockdown, we often chose to walk out on the estuary sands at low tide because it was so much quieter than the beach. We enjoy shrimp hunting and digging in the deep, soft sand, making mud piles and coating our toes with black gunk.
Daddy says the estuary is our space.
I love all the different vessels on the river.
We saw a deer running across the mud from Powderham, swim across the channel at low tide, and then run on to the marine camp.
I've always loved seeing the salmon fishermen at work. My mum knew one of them, Mr. Pym, I think, and he'd always keep her a beauty.
Sea beet is at its best. Very green and succulent leaves that are far nicer to eat than spinach, and they cook in less time. Each time I walk to Exmouth, I come back with a bunch for my meal.
Learning to read the boats on their moorings.
Extraordinary amounts of plastic in the reeds when we do the annual river clean of Topsham Wreck.
The estuary is like an umbilical cord connecting Exmouth to Exeter and a mother to her sons.
The big concern that people don't talk about a lot is Dawlish Warren. And if that went, and it will do one day.
We're so visually driven, you know, with camera phones and social media and stuff like that. And actually, sometimes the thing that's most unique about a place is the way that it sounds. I think listening is something that's really meditative, because if you listen, then you've got to stop all the inner chatter. I think that's really good. If you're hearing things that you can't necessarily see, just encouraging people to listen.
So those were the words of people that have contributed to Tidelines in this last year. You can see here.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. So what's Tidelines about from the kind of university and GSI perspective? Well, we're living in a time of global climate and ecological crises which weave through all of the systems that support and shape our lives. And they're huge, complex, intractable and global problems. And because they're systemic, they require many different parallel kinds of knowledge and different tools and processes to understand them and to make them tractable. And we really need to understand how ecological and climate systems function. And we really need to understand how our cultural and our economic systems depend on and interact with and impact those planetary life support systems, and try and vision what a future might look like where those interactions are flourishing rather than extractive. That's what we aim to do at the Global Systems Institute. And we use transdisciplinary research to unpick those systemic challenges. But most importantly, what we're really interested in doing is learning how to use that research to drive transformational change. And although the crises are part of the global impacts of our collective actions as humanity, they're ultimately things that are played out in real places and by real people. And to respond to them, we need to understand what shapes the decisions that we make as individuals or as communities or as businesses or as local governments, and the shapes of the systems in which they're embedded, the geographical systems and the ecological systems. And all places and all communities are different. Any place and the community that lives in it has its own history, which has changed its shape and its character through time, building cultural layers that define its character in the here and now, and that shape the way its people interact with or reshape or depend on its natural processes. And of course, all of the parts of that web of interactions also exist in many dimensions or play many roles at once. So a mudflat is a store of carbon and a habitat for birds and bivalves, and a spawning ground for fish, and a navigation hazard, and a sink for pollutants on their way to the sea, and somewhere you can go to shrimp and build mud castles and curl your toes in the muddy sand. But we still sometimes have a tendency of trying to map common solutions across environments or communities that from the top down appear to be similar to one another. So if an particular intervention worked really well in one estuary environment, why not try and apply it across the board in all estuary environments? And while of course it is useful to share common frameworks and best practices from one place to another, more often than not, the response or adaptation that's actually appropriate to the crises that we're facing depends a huge amount on the local context, on the specific geographic, ecological, cultural, and economic context of that place, whether that place is the rangelands of northern Kenya or the ex-estuary. And the knowledge and the experience, and not to mention the energy of the people who inhabit that place, is absolutely essential to fostering action that belongs to that place and has grown from it and is shaped to fit its particular context. So that sort of indigenous knowledge in that landscape is absolutely essential to developing an intervention that works for the people and the ecology in that place. And of course, as well as their own knowledge, their own expertise and their experience, people bring really diverse motivations and interests to attempting to make change in a place. So one person might be interested in food poverty and trying to prevent food poverty. Another might be driven by love of wildlife and a need to conserve it. And another might be driven by their business, which depends on harvesting fish or mussels from the sea or on tourism. And if we can bring all of those people together into a systems perspective and try and understand all of the different interacting influences and characters and people and non-humans that are in that estuary environment, place those people's specific expertise and interests in a web of other kinds of knowledge, then we can start to find places where we can work together to respond to these crises that we're facing in really productive ways, and collectively vision a future that actually really works for whole communities, whole places, whole ecosystems that are really shaped to their local context. And the benefit for the university in being part of this is that we've been using a word communiversity through this project, with the idea that the university becomes something that is accessible to the people in the local landscape who need to access our ability to develop particular forms of inquiry or particular forms of knowledge to fill gaps that can enable them to act in their place. So it's a really reciprocal relationship between the community and the university. I'm passing on now to Joe to describe some of the projects that have happened through Tidelines over the last year.
I'm hoping we could pitch at some point in that. Okay, an important part of Tidelines is the raising of questions from the estuary community itself for exploration leading to action, research, working as a group to include community members, students, academics, and environmental scientists. Now, it takes time to develop this process, and the initial part of this is creating discussion about elements of the estuary and asking the community for their thoughts. So I want to share with you a bit about three of our projects: the Rachel Carson Reading Project, the Estuary Box, and the High Water event. So in summer 2020, over 100 people from around the area responded to our invite to read Rachel Carson's remarkable book, The Sea Around Us, which we promoted in partnership with Devon Libraries, Libraries Unlimited, and Wild East Devon. There's the ancient book cover. It was written in the 50s. Now, we chose this book for our Tidelines summer read because it brings together so many strands that we're interested in: creativity, imagination, and science, the connection of our place here in the estuary to the wider systems of the spinning earth, and artful ways to communicate complex subjects. So Rachel Carson was a pioneering female scientist who, through her writing, inspired generations of people to take action to protect the earth. The book is unique in the way that it communicates the power and thrill of ocean systems poetically, scientifically, and holistically in a gripping, readable way. So the book was written in the 50s, and it includes early observations of climate change. This project enabled people to participate in a group project from their own homes by reading paper, as in books, electronic and audio copies of the book. Readers discussed their experiences of the books in two outdoors estuary side locations at an online discussion with other readers, researchers, and scientists in September 2020. We invited people to share responses to questions like these. Did reading the book have an impact on how you now see the ocean and the estuary? Do you think this book still has relevance today? And is there anything you were surprised by, or curious about, or want to know more about? So here we are, Lympstone. We were joined by researchers and scientists from the Marine Biological Association and the University of Exeter, who took part in the discussions and responded to questions. The two outdoor events were situated in different parts of the estuary. That is the tide coming in behind us in the gut outside Guy's boat shed in Exmouth, where much of the Exmouth boat building took place. Another location was the Lookout, which is a residence with a beautifully landscaped garden on the site of an old mussel processing factory in Lympstone. Each event was timed to fit with incoming spring tides to this so the sea became more present as the events progressed, basically. Both live events had limited numbers because of COVID. The online event included small breakout sessions where people got the chance to discuss the book in smaller groups, as is normal. That's the first project, the Rachel Carson book project. The second one is called the Estuary Box. Now, like many of us, we adapted to the arrival of lockdown. Activities which would have been in person we found function online, but were also very well suited to working on as activities at home. So we designed a box, it could be called an engagement tool, that could be picked up and delivered or posted through letterboxes and returned once it was completed to us. There we are, sorry. We describe the Estuary Box as a place to share thoughts, experiences, ideas, and questions on the estuary and coastline in your own time and from your own home. The box was promoted in social media and through radio by public Zoom talks. This included a lovely film featuring local people, of which this is a still. Requests by email were met by deliveries made by volunteers, often by bus or by foot. Inside the box, a page for a personal map of the estuary, a letter to the sea, a postcard for questions. Aimed for a demographic of participants. The activities offered a variety of different kinds of responses, observational, which, while they could be easy to do, there are perhaps unusual activities for many people. Participants could do some or all of the activities. Sorry for the Out of 350, here we are with a pile of boxes coming back that went out, we got over 50 back. And they were full of diverse personal responses, maps, observations, concerns, and questions. We're in the process, here's one person's box, it's a cracker. So yeah, we're in the process of presenting these and the contents of these and the responses on our website pages, and we continue to receive requests for boxes and responses to activities, most of which are also available also online without the box. We are also making a mobile exhibition, a physical exhibition that can be installed out of doors in places around the estuary to feedback to people the contributions that we've received. And here's a couple of pages from the website. The installation of that physical exhibition installation will include activities to further involve people in participation in all things estuarine. So that's the extra estuary box, which kept us busy. The next thing I want to talk, the next and the last of the three things I wanted to talk about was high water, which was a 13-hour Zoom event in which 60 artists and scientists talked about their work on the subject of tides, oceans, and the climate. Now, this event enabled us to situate the estuary at the center of a live international event marking tides and their impact on our lives. Audience numbers were capped at 200 and it was sold out. It began and ended at the high tide, which is 8:45 in the morning to 9:30 at night, approximately, continuously, and included contributions from all around the country and the world, from New York to Bengal, from Topsham to Stornoway. And the atmosphere was great, it was friendly and discussive, and unbelievably, there were virtually no technical hitches. So in order to show that to you, I'm going to give you a flavor of that in a film which cannot do justice to 13 and a half hours of 60 odd artists and scientists and so on, but it will give you a flavor, I hope.
Welcome everybody. We're really pleased to be with you today. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks, Anne-Marie. Hello, I'm Richard Powell from Art.Earth. I know some of you.
Hi! Go, go, go!
2 years ago. And when I came that year, the whole of this area, which you can see here, was flooded. So, even though the tide doesn't vary an awful lot on the estuary, the difference in king tide is absolutely enormous.
Are you there?
I am here. Hello.
Excellent. Wonderful. Well,
hi. Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me to join you. So that was wonderful seeing the estuary earlier. So I'm bringing you now, I'm transporting you to a slightly more urban environment.
I wanted to ask about marine organisms and what they can teach us about the tides and also about resilience and adapting to change.
Sure, yeah, when I started my career, I was really focused in the intertidal, and so I was really aware of tides and relied on them to access parts of the mudflats in the Exeter study.
So this is a map of a journey that I took, spending 3 days walking the route of where the sea is predicted to reach in the future.
The mesh of the roots catches silt, mud, debris from the water flowing by. In this way, the trees build the land, they earth the islands. Their construction presents a breaker to the semi-diurnal tide. With varying force, the tides come knocking. The mangroves meet them and send them away, baffled.
In fact, about 10 years ago, at 8 a.m., I wrote a poem about a man swimming in the sea in the winter. Thursday the 25th, and I ended the poem by saying high tide 4:46. Maybe one day, me, 105 strokes at 8 a.m. And now I am swimming. Friday the 26th.
Sarah, lovely to see you. And I wondered whether, have you been in the sea for 12 hours today?
No. I believe that our sensory awareness used to be much more connected to the tides, and I'm doing this as part of a way of trying to prepare for the future.
Inconstancy! Forever! Till the tides do us part. 2. Visit the river. Witness the boar.
I'm excited here. So this is my obsession. You can't really see what it is. They're pins. Now, each one of these has been handmade. I've got 15,000 of them picked up over 6 years, which I'd say is like a reasonable obsession.
Of some of the objects, the recognisable objects that you might find on the beach. Here, you might find these on beaches all over the world, you know, and it's quite amazing.
I imagine the moon at low tide, pulling back the sea like a blanket made of heavy fishing net, laden with catch. A shingly singing sound of sand.
Dependent upon tidal currents, but also the intertidal region, and we've seen a lot of that, the salt flats and marshlands. We've seen a lot of that today. So the tides are fundamental to our climate system as a whole.
Grand, what a day we have had from, what a range.
Okay, I hope you got some of that. I know that video can be a little bit of a risk on Zoom. So I'm going to just stop sharing now and pass. That's my 3 projects and. Okay, escape. Okay, so over to you, Em.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. So I guess you can tell, like so many other people, we've had a really busy and quite an unexpected year. And we're just digesting that first pilot year, which felt like our sort of information, our kind of formal information gathering, research and development phase. So we've had so much come back to us, and we're now exploring that material, exploring all the information, data and the fantastic range of responses that we've got from other people to integrate that into our plans going forward, and developing partnership projects that respond to some of the key themes that have emerged from people around the estuary, and building on our own experience, some of the unexpected successes last year and the new learning that we did. So there's a book called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And in that she says, ecological restoration can be viewed as an act of reciprocity in which humans exercise their caregiving responsibility for the ecosystems that sustain them. We restore the land and the land restores us. So here are just a few questions that came back in the estuary box that we received over this last year.
Are the salmon coming back?
How can we enhance its ability to support wildlife?
Is there anybody responsible for water quality?
Can dogs get any diseases from the river?
How do we ensure water quality is protected?
The estuary was once a major source of free food for villagers, mussels, shellfish, salmon, etc.
Are stocks ever likely to recover?
How safe is it to swim? Tidal, health-wise?
How clean the water? How clean is the water really compared to how it has been and how it could be?
So in response to that kind of trend around people's interest and concern around the water and its quality and its history, we're running in July a day-long creative lab or a co-designing workshop on water quality and monitoring. So we want to explore how healthy are our waters. And that day will bring together local people, researchers, artists, non-government organisations, institutions like the University of Exeter, South West Water, West Country Rivers Trust, the RSPB, Plastic Free Exmouth, and we're coming together to pool our different forms of knowledge and starting to design a research project and to think about what it might look like. The project will be about improving water quality, working with people all around the estuary, using creative methods and citizen science. And the data will help us work out where accountability lies and how improvements could be made to the health of our estuary. We'd love to be able to welcome the salmon back. We'd also like to develop a project around animating heritage. We're exploring the beginnings of a project which can bring the history and heritage of the estuary alive and to inform the present and inform our shared future. So looking at ways that people worked with the estuary, species that have lived here in the past, what's coming, the future of our estuary, as well as really celebrating our relationship to it now as part of our lives. And as Joe mentioned, the project High Water, we're developing that in 2022, working again alongside the University of Exeter as part of the Creative Arc and with the Royal Albert Memorial Museum. So this will include exploring Exeter as a tidal city, making the important links between Exeter, its estuary, the tide's reach, which has changed very much over the past and the present and the future, and the wider catchment and watershed of the Exe. The High Water next phase will also enable us to develop deeper connections with some of those tidal partners that we met and the friendships that we made through the High Water event. So these are people around the world who live on coasts, and to share the stories of other coastal communities, particularly those who may already be feeling the impacts of returning. We continue to gather and share the stories, memories and letters from people, as Joe said, through the activities that are ongoing that were in the estuary box. And those provide online galleries for the ongoing part of our project. And we're also working with students. So this year we hosted illustration students from Plymouth University over a month-long project. And we were also over the summer working with a Global Systems Institute MSc student who's looking at opportunities for community involvement in seagrass projects and their potential in the Exe. So what if we could fashion a plan that grew from understanding multiple meanings of land? Land as sustainer, as identity, land as grocery store and pharmacy, land as connection to our ancestors, land as moral obligation, land as sacred, land as self. That's another quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. I think, being part of this journey, learning more about how the people and the nature and the geography of Exmouth coexist and support one another and have coexisted and supporting one another in the past has been a really powerful journey for all of us involved in Tidelines and the whole community it's reached. And the estuary is the university's home landscape too. So it's been a powerful journey, I know, for the researchers who've been involved in it, kind of putting their roots back into that home landscape. And it's helping us to feel more connected to the land and the sea and the sky and the fundamental processes of life that connect us here and now, and at the same time link us, as Anne-Marie said, to everybody and everything else as part of a global community and a global system. And I really think that when we start to feel those connections, we can start to feel empowered to make change. And although it might be small and local, it can echo through the system and have wider implications. And it's all the more powerful for coming kind of from the roots rather than from the top down. And as you heard from Anne-Marie, that process that we've been through so far this year has started to generate some kind of really tangible research questions now. It's been a long journey, but we're starting to hone in on some things where the university can actually bring its capacity to helping fill in some of those knowledge gaps that the community has presented. And we wanted to finish up just by, it hasn't been a straightforward process. No one's had an easy time for the last year and a half. But just by reflecting on a few of the kind of the really rewarding parts and the really challenging parts of developing a collaboration like this, and where we hope it can go from here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, the scope for Tidelines in the future is vast. It's as vast as the estuary, basically, and we want to continue to develop Tidelines and in how it is supported and funded, and to keep inviting people in to run and co-design projects and research, to host students, and to continue to develop a meaningful relationship with our communities and the university. And that's to say, if there were 5 objectives that Tidelines has, we've reached about 2 of them so far. We have a lot more further to go, and it's a slow process. So should we have a look at some of the rewards? See, we're at that moment, aren't I? We've enjoyed the support and trust and openness of the university to our work through the Socially Engaged Universities funding.
Yeah, one of the rewards of this project to us has been the depth at which people have responded to the activities we've put in place. That's been really surprising and really exciting. I guess as artists who used to working absolutely face to face and on as relationships are the core of our practice, being able to establish some kind of strength of connection or relationship remotely through to a lot of people in our estuary has been really heartening and exciting.
We forged new relationships with researchers, students and academics, and have found people to be very open to collaboration and very generous with their ideas and contributions.
And I guess we wouldn't have thought by this stage in our project that we'd be connected to so many other coastal communities or coastal peoples around the world, and that's really exciting.
I think for me it's been just really rewarding to feel the university taking on that role as a kind of porous, approachable entity, which is facilitating that exchange with its local environment and its local communities.
It's also been great to provide a supportive space for academics and researchers to meet and get into dialogue with the public and share their research. For some of them, that process is new.
And our model for working is very emergent and responsive and iterative, and possibly quite different to a more defined, goal-orientated approach. So we are finding that really rewarding because we can, for example, being at a time of COVID meant that we could bring those skills to the fore about being quite malleable and responding and improvising. It's also really challenging within a university context to stay open and to enable trust, which we think we have in that more emergent, responsive way of working.
Okay, some of the challenges then. Trying to get this is going to be the same for lots of people though, trying to get a new project off the ground at a time of global pandemic has massively increased our workload and shifted our engagement plan completely.
We notice more and more that public services are stretched to an incredible degree, and so developing natural partnerships with NGOs and local authorities and government agencies can be really hard, because a lot of people in those organisations are absolutely at crisis level in terms of their own workloads. So we think this community development resilience work is important, but it's not always high on the agenda.
We also found that there were kind of various different languages from the different agencies from the academic world or outside academia, and that at times we needed interpretation.
And this project is interdisciplinary at its core, and sometimes that work is hard to find funding for. In the arts and culture sector, very often projects are short term, and really getting buy-in from funders for a longer term project can be challenging.
And there is a challenges in a sense respecting responsibility to place that we live and the people in a caring way. We have it's quite a big responsibility, like having a baby, and this can take time and care.
So perhaps the climate and ecological crisis has been pushed to the back in these last 18 months, and it's also still seen by many people as a scientific problem to be solved, rather than a weave of being a scientific and a cultural problem, or intertwining of both of those things.
I think a final kind of logistical challenge from the university perspective is in the how we take on the responsibility that we've developed as this kind of entity that has access to ways of generating new knowledge, and we really want that research to be shaped and led by the participants, but fitting that into funding agendas that come from elsewhere and timescales for projects and things actually makes it really difficult sometimes to be responsive and just say, oh, there's a real need for new knowledge here, but we don't currently have somebody who can do it, or we need to go through a really competitive funding round to try and make the opportunity happen. It's quite hard just to meet that responsibility. But I think that's enough from us, and we'd really like to open up for questions for the last 10 minutes. So I think I'm passing over to Lindsay to chair some questions, but please do pop them in the chat or just stick up your hand and ask them on the screen.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Anne-Marie, Joe and Tom. Yeah, as I say, this project is very, very close to my heart. I love it. I can see the estuary from my office here, and it's a really, really important place to me. But as much as I know the project very well already, it's always a pleasure to listen to you talk about it. And I just think you've achieved so much in this year that I'm really, really proud to have been part of that. So I just want to invite any questions from the audience. We've got a couple of comments in the chat, which I might go to in a minute. But if anybody's got any questions, please do put them in the chat and/or put your hand up. If you want to pose a question to any of our guests here. A couple of points in the chat already. So Amy said it's very interesting, just a few miles away in Teignmouth, been fighting for water quality on a community level. As just around the coast in Teignmouth, the coastline and beaches quality has been a considerable threat from the dredging of Exmouth Marina. All the spoil for this is dumped just off Spray Point and turns Teignmouth beaches black. So I think there's a lot of local interest in water quality here. I just want to ask you, while we're just waiting for the questions perhaps to come up, from my point of view, as somebody who does engage externally with communities and trying to listen to other voices and include those voices in our research at the university, how do you think the approach that you took, the creative approaches, do you think that helped in terms of getting people engaged with this research that perhaps wouldn't have otherwise been interested or have had an opportunity to get in touch with university research?
I don't know any other way. I don't really know. I mean, a straightforward interview can just not always give you the space to think more deeply, or the time, or I mean, when you're writing a letter to the sea, what you might write in that will have information in it, but it will also have a lot of personal reflective thoughts. I think it's more about the approach we've taken is invited people to take a bit more time and to reflect. For example, the almanac is a diary that people keep over a number of days, so it just gives you more space and time. It's not an interview that takes place over an hour over the phone. It's inviting people to go out, also to be, all of our work, if it had been for real with people, would have been walks or events or activities in the landscape. It's really important to us that the landscape is part of it's a player, it's a person, it's a kind of, not a person, but it has its identity as part of our identity as estuarine people. So we want to try and invite people to really think about that, and also all the other communities. We have to remember that the ex-estuary was inhabited by many other things before humans even got here, and probably will be after us. So what about all those other communities? Some of those are temporary, some of those are migratory, some of those are long-term. We really need to re-perspectivize where humans are, and opportunity to put yourself in a different perspective.
Can I just add to what Anne-Marie said there as well? I think I've worked with Anne-Marie and Joe for quite a few years now on several projects, and I think what that sort of creative underpinning behind the engagement does is, I'm a scientist and I work with data and models, but also systems in which people's decisions and people's behavior make huge difference. But what sort of facilitating the conversation in that creative space does is make it incredibly kind of equalizing, so that it really does feel like everybody has a different but equally valuable kind of knowledge to bring to the conversation. And it isn't just I'm an expert in this, you're an expert in that, tell me what you know, I'll tell you what I know. It's an incredibly open conversation, and it allows you to explore parts of those dynamics and parts of those interactions that you just wouldn't stumble upon outside of that kind of creative environment. So I found it really important as a researcher, just for kind of opening up my horizons about the complexity and the depth of the kind of systems that I'm working in. And it's been a really important experience.
And I think that's something that you did very, very well, is getting the parity of the voices as well. And I don't know how much harder that was in COVID times, trying to give everybody an equal opportunity. And, obviously, when we first started talking about this project, you were planning walks along the beach and boat trips out, and that would have been a very, very different experience and opportunity for people to add their voice to the story. Can you talk us through some of the challenges? I know you've touched upon them, the COVID challenges, but how was the level of engagement that you were able to strike up with people? How was that different over a Zoom call compared with something that would have just happened naturally during a walk?
Well, I was just thinking that a lot of the time it's about getting people to stumble over you. If you place yourself in the right place, people will come to you in engagement terms, rather than, but it has changed and needed to be a different kind of stumbling, whether it's, we did use a lot of social media for a while. I mean, I can't tell how effective that was, but it was certainly, we would have exploited everything we could to do that, really.
I think there's a whole range of people that we haven't managed to make contact with, which are all the people that aren't on social media, that aren't online, who aren't comfortable doing this sort of stuff, which is very, very many people. And for example, people who are older or who don't feel that their knowledge is valued. So there are many people living on our estuary who have incredible knowledge that they think no one's interested in. So that even if they heard a call, they wouldn't respond to it because they wouldn't have perhaps the self-esteem or the confidence to step forward. And those are the people that we you just find when you're hanging out by the harbour or you're sitting having a sandwich in the gut and you start a conversation. So that's what we've really missed. But we're, now we can get out and about. That's the layer of people that we would really love to connect with. But having said that, we've had some really lovely connections, for example, across generations, where whole families have got a box, an ancestry box, a grandparent.
Oh, I think we might have lost you.
Oh no.
Oh, just in the middle of that story.
No.
Oh, are we gone?
Yeah, you're back again.
Okay, yeah, so yeah, intergenerational activity has been brilliant, and that's been really rewarding.
And that was part of the purpose of the ancestry box, wasn't it, to try and reach some of those people who wouldn't engage online?
Yeah.
That's fuzzy.
I know, I'm trying to show my box now, but it just wants to, it's fuzzy. It's lovely. I think that is so nice that it's something that's tangible that's come out of this. And this is important as well, I think, from an inclusive point of view. And from, am I still muted? No, I'm not. I think in terms of being able to reach everybody that we wanted to reach during the COVID times, because not everybody's on social media, not everybody can do Zoom calls, but the physical X box or the ancestry box was a really lovely thing for people to actually receive through their letterboxes and be able to respond to. So I think that was a really helpful way at extending the reach of the project. We've got another couple of minutes. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to pose to Anne-Marie, Joe or Tom before we leave? I can't see any hands up.
I was just going to pick up on Amy's comment about the impact of activity in Exmouth on the Tean estuary, and I think that's just a really powerful illustration of the interconnectivity of all of our lives and how decisions in that one estuary environment are affecting the quality of another estuary environment, and you've got whole communities that could be in touch and interacting there. And I think the movement of sediment has been a kind of underlying theme through a lot of our discussions about the estuary because of Dawlish Warren and the work that's gone on there over the last couple of years, and this adds another layer to that even. So it would be really interesting to have that conversation with Teignmouth as well.
Yeah, I think we're really keen to say that Tidelines is a portal for other people to use. I think there's a question here about individual, and I think it's which Sarah makes, which is completely right. There's so little we can do, even as a pair of people, and our intention has always been that Tidelines is an opportunity for other people to use our umbrella to raise the questions and the research that they really want to see happen, and we can help facilitate that. So that's kind of really clear. It's not our agenda. We're trying to represent a much broader agenda, encourage people to step forward, to become active and to help them, because that can be quite intimidating, not only for researchers and scientists, but also for community to step forward.
I did share a link to the Tidelines website a little bit further up the chat. I hope that's come through for everybody, but that's a way to reach out if you'd like to.
Absolutely, and there's an awful lot more on that website as well. It's a really, really beautiful website to explore, so please do. We'll pop that back in the chat again in a moment. But unless anybody else has got any more questions, I'll just finish with Karen's left a comment saying, I love the way that art-science divide has been opened up by this project. And I'll second that. I think it's been absolutely a joy to work with you both, and I look forward to other opportunities again in the future. So thank you very much, Anne-Marie, Joe and Tom, and to everybody else. Thank you very much for joining us, and the next session I believe will commence at 2:30. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.